Welcome to Sleepy Historian, where old tales whisper by candlelight, and memories gently drift into dreams. Tonight, let us journey back to a time long asleep in history. Joan of Arc, the girl who heard divine voices and changed the fate of a kingdom. From a humble peasant village, she rose to lead armies, crown a king, and become a saint. Her courage, faith, and sacrifice made her an immortal symbol of hope and resistance. In the quiet village of Domremy, nestled in the rolling hills of eastern France, a child was born in the year 1412. Her name was Jeanne, a peasant girl, living a simple life, in a land torn apart by the 100 Years' War. When Jeanne was only 13, something extraordinary began to happen. She spoke of hearing voices, gentle, heavenly voices. They came to her from Saints Michael, Catherine, and Margaret. Their message was clear and urgent. She was to help the King of France, to free her homeland from the grasp of the English. At first, her family thought it was childish fantasy. The villagers, too, were skeptical. But there was something unwavering in Jeanne's eyes, a quiet fire, a faith that would not be shaken. She believed, truly believed, that her destiny was tied to the fate of France. And though she had never held a sword, though she was only a farmer's daughter, she listened to the call from heaven. In 1429, Jeanne persuaded a relative to escort her to the city of Vaucouleurs to seek an audience with Charles VII, the uncrowned King of France. It was a long and perilous journey, but Jeanne believed God would protect her. When she arrived, she astonished the military officers with her prophecies, wisdom, and unwavering faith. Charles VII, curious and desperate amidst a kingdom in chaos, agreed to let her try her chance. Jeanne was sent to Poitiers to be examined by priests for her spiritual purity and moral character. After many investigations, they concluded she was a maid of virtue. Charles finally gave her permission to join the army and aid in lifting the siege of Orleans, a city under English control. Jeanne was now allowed to go to war, beginning her divine mission to save Orleans. Though she had no formal military training, Jeanne d'Arc quickly learned to ride, wield weapons, and wear armor like a true warrior. She was not a traditional commander, but a spiritual symbol to the soldiers. Her white banner, adorned with the image of Christ and words from Scripture, was held high in battle, renewing the faith of the desperate French troops. When she reached Orleans, Jeanne inspired the soldiers with her courage and divine presence. Her arrival marked a turning point. The morale of the French troops soared, and they began to fight back fiercely. Jeanne's courage and presence were a rallying cry for the men. Though she had never been to war, Jeanne became the heart of the first great victory in her miraculous journey. Jeanne, the girl who had never gone to war, had become the center of a divine victory. Under Jeanne's leadership, the French launched multiple assaults on the English fortresses surrounding Orleans. Fierce fighting erupts as the French push against the heavily defended enemy positions. Though struck by an arrow during one of the battles, Jeanne refused to withdraw. She returned to the battlefield, lifting her banner and leading the soldiers once more. After several days of fierce combat, the English were forced to retreat. The victory at Orleans was like a bell tolling the rebirth of France. Jeanne d'Arc, just 17, had become a symbol of courage and miracles. The people called her the maid sent by God, and the warriors believed God truly stood with them. The victory at Orleans was more than just a battle. It paved the way for a political turning point, the coronation of Charles VII. Jeanne persuaded the king to hold his coronation in Reims, the traditional site where French kings were crowned. Even though many regions were still occupied by the English, Jeanne and the army carved a path through dangerous lands to reach Reims. Along the way, many towns surrendered without a fight, as Jeanne's legend had spread far and wide. In July 1429, Charles VII arrived in Reims for his coronation. Charles VII was crowned at Reims Cathedral, with Jeanne at his side, banner in hand, tears in her eyes as her mission neared fulfillment. Jeanne, once a village girl, now stood beside a king she helped crown. But this was only the beginning of the tragedy yet to come. After the coronation, Jeanne d'Arc wished to continue the campaign to capture Paris's stronghold still under English and Burgundian control. However, King Charles VII had grown hesitant and no longer listened to Jeanne as he once had. The assault on Paris in September 1429 fell. Jeanne was wounded, and the French were forced to retreat. Even so, she continued small military missions, liberating several towns. But support for her at court began to fade. In 1430, as Jeanne tried to defend the town of Compiègne from the Burgundians, she was captured on the battlefield. Burgundian soldiers handed her over to the English, who saw her as a threat, both militarily and symbolically. Jeanne, the girl who had crowned a king, was now in the hands of her enemies, betrayed and alone. Joan was taken to Rouen city under English control to stand trial for heresy. The trial was unfair. The inquisitors were pro-English clergy determined to discredit her and weaken Charles VII. Joan was charged with wearing men's clothing, hearing mysterious voices, and claiming to be chosen by God. Only 19 years old, Joan stood alone against dozens of seasoned theologians. Her intelligence, courage, and honesty left many speechless. But the verdict had already been decided. She was declared a heretic. Though she initially signed a confession for mercy, when forced to wear mail armor again in prison to protect herself, the court claimed she had relapsed and sentenced her to death. The young woman who had crowned a king now faced death, betrayed and condemned. On May 30, 1431, Jeanne d'Arc was led to the marketplace of Rouen to face execution. She was tied to the stake before a large crowd. Many wept at the sight of Joan with her hair shaved, yet her face still radiant with faith. She prayed until the very last moment. As the flames rose, Joan cried out, "Jesus, Jesus." A soldier later confessed, "We burned a saint." Joan's body was reduced to ashes. Her remains were cast into the Seine to prevent anyone from keeping relics. Though her enemies tried to erase her memory, Joan's death made her an immortal symbol in the hearts of the French. 25 years after Jeanne was burned, King Charles VII, whom she had helped to the throne, ordered a new investigation. A new trial was held, reviewing all previous records and hearing testimony from dozens who had known and followed Jeanne. Testimonies were taken from those who had known Jeanne personally. Default text. She had been wrongly condemned for political reasons and due to the Church's corruption. The verdict declared Jeanne innocent, pure, and a martyr for her faith and love of France. Jeanne was no longer seen as a heretic, but as a martyr. This restoration paved the way for her canonization and ensured that Jeanne would become a legend that could never be erased. In 1920, nearly 500 years after her death, Jeanne d'Arc was officially canonized by the Catholic Church. She became one of the most venerated saints in France. The image of Jeanne, the young girl with the white banner and burning gaze, standing amid the battlefield, became a symbol of patriotism, faith, and sacrifice. Her story inspires not only the French, but people across the world. That an ordinary person, even a peasant girl, could change history with courage and unshakable faith. Today, Jeanne d'Arc is remembered in many places around the world. She is a timeless symbol of freedom, justice, and faith. Jeanne d'Arc, the saint, the warrior, the peasant girl, remains an everlasting legend. Joan of Arc's life was brief but eternal. Though betrayed and martyred, her courage and faith ignited a nation's soul. She rose from ashes to sainthood, becoming not just a heroine of France, but a symbol of hope for the world, proof that one voice can change history. Tonight's story comes to a close. If your eyes have gently shut, then I wish you a deep, peaceful sleep, until we meet again in the next dream.